Now that we understood how to find cross-site scripting and how to verify that those are real vulnerabilities, we are ready to come up with our countermeasures or mitigation techniques report. So let's talk about our first example again. We go to the folder one, and then here we're gonna use the secure version of our script. So basically what we are doing is, let me open it, is this one. So see, what we are gonna do here is this. As you remember, we don't have any input validation right there, right? So what we are gonna do is, let me open the secure version. So we're gonna use HTML special charge entity in order to validate this specific input. We copy it, we close it, and then here, instead of just receiving the input, we're gonna say, hey, pass it through the input validation. Now we are adding end quotes, which says also protect against single quote and double quotes, and it's recommended to add also the end substitute. This basically means if you have invalid unit points, which is related to Unicode strings, also send a blank response. That means that if someone is trying to play with Unicode attacks, it's gonna help us. So we have this value, and then we are ready to test if the solution works. So we go back to the one, it's still working. It's still working. And then if we start putting here something, as we remember this guy, and then semicolon, and you know, the alert, blah blah blah, you know, just replicating our first attack, we can see that now we didn't get the pop-up because it was properly validated. In other words, our recommendation for cross-site scripting is, in this scenario, to use this specific function, which is going to help us in order to protect the response being sent and not treat the content as JavaScript code. Let's go to the second one. I'm going to use this guy. So in the second one, let me, what we are doing here is this. First of all, the order, and I'm gonna open right now the vulnerable options so that we can see the difference. So at the top is the vulnerable version. You remember, we have a proper input validation, but after the proper input validation, there was a normalization process which was maliced by the attacker and give us vulnerable cross-site scripting. In the bottom of the page, we can see the proposal. In the proposal, you see the difference? The difference is just do anything you want to do with the content. Normalization, transformation, anything you want. When you are ready to copy this content back to the response, the last step in the chain is where you need to put your validation. In this case, your output HTML encoding. Because as you can see, after this step, the letter B is copied in the response. So that's the recommendation. You can see here that there was security controls in place, but the way the design of this specific page was improper. Again, we can obviously validate that this is working fine. So we go to sec And here, let's open our tamper data again. We click submit and tamper to intercept it. And then here, what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna copy quickly. Let me grab the content of this guy again. I'm just gonna quickly test that this is not working anymore. So I'm gonna put here percentage, and this guy, if you remember, is the less signed that is supposed to be normalized, right? So if we click OK and we go to our page, we can see that visually it is the same, but let me just quickly stop the tamper, and behind the scenes we can see that it was transformed. What happens was it do the normalization, and then when we get to the point where we need to validate it, just let me close. Oh no, it's okay, sorry. So guys, here we do the normalization, it do the transformation into the less than sign, and then our HTML special charge was able to find it and say, I know who you are, and I'm gonna make sure that you are just an HTML entity. And therefore we saw that is not able to be executed again. Finally, let's go to our report. As usual, we have an ID so that we can follow up the resolution of this specific security control or recommendation. We said that the risk level is medium. Here, the spoofing is the threat type. Why spoofing? Because in this case, if you can steal cookies via cross-site scripting, you can impersonate end users. It's just one example. The threat description, cross-site scripting due to lack of input and output validation. As usual, you can put the line of code being affected. Then the risk analysis, so that we know the risk level, which can help us to prioritize this specific issue. High risk levels is going to tell us that needs to be fixed as soon as possible. So the impact to the organization is low. Why low? Because in this scenario, it says that it is affecting a public facing section only. That means a section which is publicly available by anyone, but that section, even if it is exploitable, it doesn't contain any sensitive information. There is no information disclosure, and therefore, I mean, there is an impact, but it's going to be low for the organization. The likelihood of exploitation is high, definitely, because as we saw, there was no input or output validation. So the resource is exposed to internet without any validation. Finally, the mitigation techniques. The corrective one, which means something that needs to be fixed as soon as possible, is in the control E.1.1. Restrict input to a specific type and size. Is always welcome to do input validation, although in cross-site scripting the most important part is the output encoding, as we saw via HTML special chars. The input validation is also very useful because it can help you to limit the attack range from the hackers. You can say, you know what, you're just allowed to put 10 characters and only numbers, for example. That's going to be more difficult for an attacker to execute it. Still possible, but more difficult. And also the recommendation to use HTML special chars with those specific options and quotes and substitute. We talk about the standard, in this case PCI 6.5.7, which talks about cross-site scripting. And finally, the preventive actions. Obviously perform security code reviews during requirements phase, so that these kind of issues can be identified on time before moving to production, and training for the developer related to ethical hacking so that he can understand how cross-site scripting works and other web-based vulnerabilities, and then he have more options when dealing with the solutions. See you in the later class.